Thank you. The first thing to settle is that the present international monetary financial system will die and will never recover. This system is finished. The only possibility that exists now is to create a replacement system based on the principles of the founding of the U.S. economic system with the founding of the actual constitutional government, as defined under particularly Alexander Hamilton. If you don't understand and agree with Alexander Hamilton, it's like saying there is no future for you. Now, last year, I proposed in steps 3 specific remedies which are not cures of the problem, but are absolutely necessary to be put into place immediately, then, and even more so now. These 3 remedies, without that, there's no future for the United States and no future for the world. We're not looking at a depression. We're looking at what is called a general breakdown crisis. That is where money goes out of existence. It's no longer really negotiable. So-called financial assets don't exist. Everything evaporates. In a worse crisis than the type that occurred during the middle of the 14th century Europe, which was called a New Dark Age, a period which half the parishes of Europe disappeared, and 1/3 of the total population. It was not until a half century later, with the Renaissance, that there was the beginning of a recovery of civilization, and that was almost a miracle. What we face today is a crisis which is very similar, under admittedly different historical circumstances, than that of Europe's 14th century. It's much worse, but of the same type. And without a miraculous solution, a dramatic solution, not reforms, but a dramatic, complete solution, a new system, without putting a new system of the proper design into effect immediately, not by experimenting back and forth, but by putting the system in with foreknowledge and according to prescription. Without those measures, there is no possibility that civilization will survive as civilization. Mankind would survive after a vast depopulation of the planet, probably as much as the 3.5 billion people that Al Gore and Prince Philip of England want. Remember that Al Gore is a stooge for Prince Philip. Al Gore is like Aaron Burr. Both were once vice presidents of the United States. Both were traitors to the United States on behalf of the British monarchy. And the prince has demanded that the human population drop from 6.5 billion presently to less than 2 billion, and that in short order. Al Gore's entire career is devoted to that end, and he is a flunky of Prince Philip. He is a British agent, like Aaron Burr, the traitor. He is implicitly a traitor, and he is trying to run for President of the United States as soon as Obama drops. That's his big ambition, or his two ambition. Yeah? Now, what I proposed, to review what I proposed a year ago in steps. First of all, that all regular banks be put into protection, bankruptcy protection, by the federal government. This means they will not close their doors. This means that there will be a restriction on what which of their accounts will be paid. The rest will be frozen. At the same time, there will be no evictions of householders because of mortgage default. They will remain in their homes under conditions which are acceptable conditions, and they will continue to function under bankruptcy protection. There will be no foreclosures. There must be no foreclosures, except in the ordinary case where there should be anyway because people are leaving or so forth. But where people intend to stay in their homes, there should be no foreclosures. We're going to have foreclosures on things which are, in a sense, held out for rent, but not for occupancy. That's number one. The idea is the first thing you have to do is you have to save the people. And the people, in general, live in homes. Many of them are, well, some live elsewhere, you know. Some of our youth live in strange places. And there are new types of places are being invented at all times. We are not going to have communities shut down, which means that the local bank on which the community depends for its functioning will not be closed. The doors will remain open. This, however, is only for certain banks. For banks which are banks of deposit and chartered under the federal government and the state governments as depository institutions which engage in lending. So therefore, the first thing was homeowners, householders, and Bankers Protection Act. That was necessary. It was presented actively around the country. It was blocked. It was blocked by the Democratic Party leadership. Blocked by the same people who presumably were enthusiastic until recent time for Barack Obama. So we see the result. We see the foreclosures are now moving in. Communities are being shut down. And the banks are closing, like Wachovia and others. Now, Wachovia is a piece of junk, but it also does regular banking. And it gobbled up a lot of small banks. And therefore, we have a threat to the continued functioning of communities in which people live. That is, even if we keep them in their homes, the jobs on which they depend to stay in their homes are going away because the banks which are involved with these jobs are being closed. The rate of bank foreclosures across the Atlantic and around the world is beyond imagination. That's the first measure. It wasn't done. A year has passed since I proposed that. It has not been done. Even though towns and even city organizations, towns, cities, and state organizations have proposed that it be done. It has not been done. The Congress of the United States, under the leadership of Nancy Pelosi, has blocked this, absolutely. And she's on the wrong side. She should get on another side, outside. Nothing has been done to protect the banks. What's happened? Let's take the case, just a recent case in this vicinity. Bank of America. Countryside. Bank of America was told to absorb a dead corpse inside its body. Countryside. Countrywide. We have been destroying banks that should have been saved by putting the bomb inside them in order to support institutions which are not worth saving and should have been allowed to die because they're of no use to the community. We don't need those mortgages. Those mortgages are a problem. We don't need these things. That wasn't done. So I had two other proposals, which I put out forth during the course of those months. First of the two, we must have a two-tier credit system. Now, I don't know if Hank Paulson has the knowledge or guts to take this up. I'm not sure he has the knowledge involved. He probably will have an inclination or a wish to do something in that direction. But so far, he's done nothing. He's a half-competent person, but not fully competent. He's the Treasury of the Secretary. He's a Secretary of the Treasury. And I don't think he or almost anyone else in authority in Washington has the guts to do what I've proposed. Create a two-tier credit system. In other words, the proposal is 4% is the standard interest rate for regular banking, the basic interest rate. Now, the purpose of that is not just adjusting the interest rate. We have a situation now where our enemy, as it was in the time of Aaron Burr, is merry old England. And merry old England set up a system in Europe under which Great Britain has the highest official interest rate. Europe has a slightly lower interest rate, and the United States has been driven down to 2% and is threatened lower, which is insane. This manipulation has the following effect. The British are determined to destroy the United States. That's what that is about. And they say so. And many in Europe are out to destroy the United States. They say, good, this is going to destroy the United States. And that's what the 2% interest rate is, borrowing rate is, destroy the United States. Because what happens then with a 2% interest rate, a discount rate, what you get is an outflow of the capital, of the financial capital, from the U.S. banking system. I am determined that I can beat the British and sink them and kick Europeans who cooperate with the British in the head by a 4% standard rate throughout the Federal Reserve System. Why? Because the British are a bunch of parasites. They don't use the money for solid investment. The continental Europeans are not allowed to do that under the Maastricht agreements. Therefore, if you protect bank deposits by having a 4% interest rate in the United States, that means that you're going to keep your financial capital that's viable in those banks. That is, you're not going to take the capital out of the banks and put it on the street for lending and take it out of the bank. You're going to keep it in the bank, but you're going to use the bank credit of that capital, financial capital, in the bank as a lendable asset, which you will lend either at 4% or with government protection, federal government protection, as low as 1% to 2% for special projects. That means the capital of the United States, including its financial assets, its credit, will not be depleted the way it's being sucked dry now. We don't have to have a 5% interest rate, the type the British are using. We don't need that, because the British are a bunch of parasites. They don't invest in their own country. We invest in our country. We have to invest in our country. Therefore, if we have credit in the bank, we're not going to take the money out of the bank. What we're going to do, the federal government will simply take the fact that the Federal Reserve System banks and its affiliates have credit in the form of deposits or equivalent of deposits in the bank. They will now issue loans, which will be new money in a sense in circulation, for specific purposes on the basis of the asset, the financial asset which remains in the bank. In other words, the first thing here is to keep the financial assets of the United States regular banking system as much as possible inside the United States. Don't deplete that capital by shipping it out and loaning it. Keep it in the banks as credit under federal regulation with the assistance of the Federal Reserve Board. Then use that credit in the banks to utter new credit for authorized purposes to make the economy grow and to solve some of the problems. That's a defensive measure. It's not a solution. It's a defensive measure. We had a similar kind of situation in the past. Roosevelt did that in his own different way, under different circumstances. We need to have a growth program. Now, a physical growth program, not a financial growth program as such, but a physical growth program. We have people losing jobs. We have communities disintegrating. We have infrastructure going. We have healthcare collapsing. We need tangible investments, job-creating investments, physical capital investments, infrastructure investments. We need them. We've got to increase our rate of employment, of productive employment especially. We don't need more bookkeepers. Look what they've done to us. What we need is work. We need significant production. So we're simply at the first stage. We have to say on a Tuesday, for example, that now the banking system is now under protection. And the Federal Reserve System is bankrupt. So what? The Federal Reserve System is not the U.S. government. The Federal Reserve System is a chartered banking system. It will be put into receivership for protection by the federal government. Then it will function as like a regular banking system under the U.S. Treasury. The credit it uses will be the debt of the U.S. government under the U.S. credit system. And that credit that generated will then be used through the banking system, and when not directly by the government, to create the additional investments we need to stabilize this economy. Now, what that means in respect to Europe. Europe today, Western and Central Europe, under Maastricht, is not allowed to do anything intelligent. It's a British trick. So therefore, Europe is not able to do this as long as it remains under the Maastricht dictatorship. We are free if we can get rid of that idiot in the White House or get him under control. We are free to begin a defensive measure to defend the U.S. banking system, to build up the relative value of the dollar relative to every other currency on this planet. And our friends in China will be happy with that, because right now they're about to lose everything because of the collapse of the dollar. We are going to defend the value of the U.S. dollar. We are going to increase its value on the markets by doing this, by these kinds of measures, if we can get our idiots under control. We have to do it, because if we don't do it, we will die. The problem is you've got people who say, well, I would like to do that, but you know, I'm so risky, it's so awesome, I don't think we could do that. Buddy, you're not telling people what you got to tell them. Look, buddy, the word is, the ship is sinking. Get off it. Don't negotiate for a new stateroom on the Titanic. This thing is going down. Do you want to go down with it? Well, if you don't want to go down with it, get into this lifeboat now. Don't tell me it's too fearful to get into the lifeboat. What you ought to be afraid of is the sinking ship, not the lifeboat. And what I'm proposing in this respect is simply setting up a system, a flotilla of lifeboats to save the U.S. dollar. And I think we could increase that by about 20 or 30% fairly rapidly, which I think some of our friends in China will be a little bit relieved by that, because we owe them a lot in dollars. And if these dollars are collapsing, that is not good. We have to defend the U.S. dollar. As necessary for us, it's necessary for the world. And there's no, it's too scary. No, it's not too scary. Going down in the Titanic is scary. The lifeboat is a little bit worrying, but it's a better option. And any intelligent person would recognize that. Right. The third thing is, this can't go on indefinitely. We must take measures of defense to defend the U.S. dollar. We must have a goal of increasing the relative value of the U.S. dollar by 20% in the short term. I think we can do it if we can get the right action from Washington. Right. But now we've got to go to a further step. We then have to go, and this is going to be the tricky one. This is where you send Obama to the woodshed or someplace else. We have to have a presidential candidate of the United States, because we can't wait till November. Sometime in the short time ahead, we have to have a leading presidential candidate of the United States affirm what I have proposed be done. That is, the United States must propose to the governments of Russia, China, and India that these four major countries will agree to sponsor a committee, an alliance of powers, including other powers, to establish a fixed exchange rate financial or credit system internationally, of the type that Roosevelt intended in 1944, not what Truman did in 1945. What Roosevelt proposed was a credit system whose intention was to eliminate colonialism, especially British colonialism. And Roosevelt said that repeatedly, very clearly to Churchill. Winston, when this war is ended, Winston, we're not going to have your empire. We're not going to have colonies. These people are going to be free. They're going to have their own governments and no more empire. And are we going to do that? Well, we had the greatest military machine the world had ever known, a production machine, where the Nazis would produce in a few hundred pounds, we would produce in tons. Our soldiers were not well trained in general. They've just got into the service off the streets or out of the woods. It's a short time earlier. Trained in 16 weeks and a few other weeks and sent overseas to war. This is not really recommended army. But we had tonnage. Every man in service had tonnage behind him. And with that tonnage and that power of mobility and logistics that we had, we won the war. Together with other people who cooperated with us, with our aid of our tonnage. It was our tonnage that Russia depended upon, the Soviet Union depended upon, to defend itself against Hitler. It was tonnage that was required. Tonnage of material. So we had the greatest machine for production the world had ever known at the end of the war. It had been built up in large degree for military purposes. But there's no difference between logistics for a military purpose and the technology required to build for an economy. Bridges, ships, railway systems, everything, machine tools. All of these kinds of things are just as much interchangeable with material for war and material for peace. Roosevelt's intention, as he stated clearly, was that once the war is ended, Winston, and this was in Casablanca, we are not going to have your system anymore. And he laid out a scheme for a large-scale development of Africa. We're not going to have colonies anymore. We're going to help these people have independent nations. We're going to cooperate with them. And we're going to eliminate your empire, Winston. Well, the problem is that Roosevelt died. And Truman was a stooge for the British. That's no exaggeration. So what Churchill did was enter into alliance with Truman and with the British behind Churchill, and they decided they're going to start a preventive nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. Why? To defeat Roosevelt's intention. Because Roosevelt's intention was to take China, Russia, and the United States, who were the leading powers of the world at that moment, at the end of the war, and through a system of cooperation, redevelop the world, a war-torn, ruined world. So what did you do? You start a war with the leading allies and partners of the United States. Under Roosevelt, you start a war with Truman against those same allies in order to preserve what? The British Empire. Instead of eliminating British colonies, Churchill and company, with Truman's support, backed the reinstallation. For example, under British orders, the Japanese troops which were in prison camps in Indochina were told to get out of the prison camps, pick up their weapons, and go back into the occupation of Indochina. Indochina had freed itself from French imperialism with U.S. backing. Ho Chi Minh was a friend of the United States, a friend of Roosevelt, a friend of Roosevelt's machine. We turned friends into enemies, allies into enemies. We helped the Dutch do the same thing in the Indies. We made a mess of the freedom of India a year after I left the place. Again, the British. So under Truman, we systematically destroyed Roosevelt's intention. Roosevelt's intention was we take our great economic machine, our agro-industrial machine for capital goods, and we use this weapon to free the subjugated people. And by doing so, to free the world from the damn British Empire. And Truman was an ally of the cause of the British Empire. And that's how this mess came about. That's how we came to a Cold War through this process. How we came to witch hunt terror in the United States. How our youth, born between, to a large degree, the white-collar youth, born between 1945 and 1958, were in large degree turned into a passive pack of intellectual mongrels, degenerates, by things like the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the comparable existentialist operations inside the United States. This is where the 68ers came from, a product of the same thing that happened in France under Napoleon III, which became known as the Syndicus. And what we have today among a certain strata of the white-collar baby boomers, now generally between 50 and 65 years of age. They are synarchists. They are fascists. And that's what Bohr's constituency is, fascist. That's what the environmentalist movement is. It's fascist. It's a syndicist movement, modeled upon the syndicalism as developed under Napoleon III, which was then put through various existentialist migrations in the 20th century, where it became known as fascism, including the fascism of H.G. Wells of Britain, that sort of thing. So that's been the problem. So what we have to do is recognize that where Roosevelt was going to use the productive power of the United States at the end of the war, we were the greatest power the planet ever known in terms of financial, economic power, to use that power to free the world from imperialism by helping nations, which should be nations, to become nations, and creating a fraternity of nations based on this idea of building a world system of sovereign nation states, which would eliminate empires, especially the British Empire. And all the hell that we've had, and we've had a lot of it up to the present time, since the day Franklin Roosevelt died, has all been a result of this damn British Empire. Our job as the United States is to reaffirm the commitment of Franklin Roosevelt before he died, a commitment he stated clearly to many people, leading people of the world at that time while he was still alive, to free and help the development of people who have been semi-captive or captive peoples of the world, and to build an alliance of sovereign nation states to manage this world and to end empire forever, and to devote ourselves to the missions of the Peace of Westphalia. The mission of man is not to win wars. Sometimes we have to fight war, but that's not our intention. The power and importance of a nation does not lie in fighting wars. Wars are terrible things. They're awful things. Some baby boomers don't understand that. That's why they sent people into this thing in Iraq, because they don't understand what war is. War is something which you do, if necessary, as briefly as possible, and do everything possible to avoid it, if you understand war. So the aim of sovereignty is not to become a war power. The need to be able to defend one's nation, yes, but to become a war power, no. To become an empire, no. We are we have peoples on this planet of different cultural backgrounds. We depend upon our association with culture, our culture, in order to think, in order to communicate among ourselves, among our own people. And to unite our people with a common culture, or what becomes a common culture, to cooperate with nations of other cultures, and to define common aims of mankind, common goals of mankind. I'll refer to one here today of that type. This is something we're supposed to have learned in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia. The aim of the victory lies not in war, but in peace, in the peace of peoples who have replaced killing each other with cooperating with each other and using their differences in cultural background as the basis for their cooperation, not for their conflict. And to use the weapons of warfare only as is necessary to maintain and defend that peaceful order with a minimum of effort, a minimum of conflict when necessary. So therefore, the time has come, instead of saying, who is the enemy? I can tell you who the enemy is. A British Union jerk. That's an enemy. There are other enemies. But how do we overpower our enemies? What's the best way to overpower our enemies? To conquer them? No. Conquest is not victory. It's to dissuade them from continuing to be enemies. And how was that done in 1648? It was done through the Peace of Westphalia, of putting the benefit of the other above one's own. And if people do that, then you have a system of cooperation, a Westphalian system as it's called. That's Roosevelt's intention, was to create a global Westphalian system. To take leading nations of the world, which at that time were the United States, China, and Russia, the Soviet Union then, who had conflicts, very serious conflicts. And to take these nations and bring them together by working each for the benefit of the others, the common benefits. Now today we are at a point where there's one project which typifies what should be done. It's a project that came out of the success of the United States in defeating the British agents called the Confederacy, the traitors, the Confederacy. We had developed in the United States, as nowhere else, we had developed a concept of transcontinental railway systems. Transcontinental railway systems were developed as a technological capability superior to inland water systems. In other words, what Charlemagne did in Europe, Charlemagne took the rivers of Europe under his regime, identified the rivers of Europe, and prescribed a program of developing canal systems which would connect these rivers in such a way that you would have an inland water-based transportation system for freight in particular throughout Europe. As a matter of fact, that system was just completed recently at the beginning of the 1990s. The last leg, the Rhine-Danube connection. So railroads came along, and usually we'll find the first major railroads ran along the side of rivers and canals, like the Baltimore and Ohio system. You will find the old system, the railway system, ran beside the canal, the Baltimore and Ohio Canal, which was a very important strategic development in the United States. Today, we have the same challenge in a different form. What the war has been, in the wars, all the important wars of the world fought since 1876 have been so-called geopolitical wars. Geopolitical wars meant that the United States had built a model as a continental power, a transcontinental power, from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from the Canadian to the Mexican border. This nation had been developed as an integral nation, largely by aid of augmenting existing and potential waterborne systems by railway systems, integrated the territory. By 1876, every nation of Asia, leading nation of Asia, had, for example, Sun Yat-sen, a little later, a complete railway system for China, a complete design for a railway system. The development of the total internal territory of a nation or a group of nations to enable it to more efficiently than by ocean freight to move people, move goods, move raw materials, develop the territory. So now the fact is that the United States had led in this model. You had in France, you had in Germany, you had in Russia, you had a development in part in China, the conception of taking all of Eurasia, as well as the Americas. The plan for moving railway systems down to the Patagonia from the Canadian border was a policy of that period. And to create a system whose aim was a fraternity of sovereign nation states which would share the benefit of combined inland waterways and railway systems. Today we have the same thing. Today, still then, we had it then, still today. One of the great missions is to develop a maglev system combined with railway system, which by opening up the Bering Strait and by doing similar things into Africa, is to take the major continents of the world and bring them together with one high-speed transportation system for freight and people, especially freight, at maglev speeds, magnetic levitation, 300 miles an hour. These can be modular. You don't have to have all this reloading as we do now. And this means that the raw materials of the world can be developed as they otherwise cannot be developed and managed. So therefore, this is the common interest of mankind to develop this kind of system. We've come into a time where we can no longer rely upon burning things as a source of power. We will burn water with nuclear power. What we will do with high-temperature gas-cooled reactors and similar kinds of nuclear power, we will extract hydrogen from water. We will use that fuel based on hydrogen-based fuels, as a substitute replacement for petroleum as a source of power. When combustion occurs for that fuel, the waste is chiefly water, not a pollutant. We will eliminate the kinds of crude methods we now use by these superior methods. So this is one example, the development of a global power network as a cooperative effort among nations and among continents for the common aims of mankind. A system based on separate sovereign nation states cooperating with aid of these kinds of connections. That we must have that kind of mission, which is a 50-year, 100-year mission for mankind. And when we bring nations together, such as the United States, Russia, China, and India, and other countries today, for a future for mankind, this is what we must have in mind. We must take the needs of various nations, look at what these needs are for 3, 4, 5 generations to come, and say, what projects do we have to develop for the coming 3 to 4 or 5 generations? What are the means we require? What is the apparatus we require to do this job? What are the common aims of mankind? And that's the mentality we must have approach. Now, what we would have is a world system, world credit system, not a money system. You would have money, but you wouldn't have a money system. You have money as a sovereign agency of government, a sovereign instrument of government. But what we would do simply is create a fixed exchange rate system by adjusting essentially what have been the trends in the relative values of currencies. Fix it there. And say that we're going to keep that fixed exchange rate system. Now, the changes that come after that do not come by manipulating currencies. They come by investment. They come by the use of credit for capital improvements, for large projects, for all these kinds of things, including human development projects. And what we do is we're taking what Roosevelt intended in 1944 with a credit system called the Bretton Woods system and uniting countries of the world around a fixed exchange rate system. So money is no longer an instrument of warfare, it's an instrument of cooperation. By a credit system of this type, how we do it is very simple. The United States, under its Constitution, when the Constitution is obeyed, does not have a money system, like a Keynesian monetary system. That's a European disease. And it's a very bad disease with some nasty side effects. You get syphilis also, among other things, from that disease. But a credit system of the United States system, you cannot utter money by central banking systems. Money or credit, which is convertible into money, can be allowed only through actions of governments. That is, no bank can create money. Only a government can create money. And the government creates money by credit, by authorizing the utterance of debt of the government in the form of credit. And it defines that debt as applicable to certain missions. That is, like investments or developments of people. Now, because the United States Constitution is the one major nation in the world which has such a specific conception of economy, if a country such as Russia, China, India, makes a treaty agreement with the United States, which is a credit-based nation, then the currency of those countries, Russia, China, India, and other countries, becomes on an equal status with the United States. It becomes an integral part of a world system while preserving the sovereignty of each of these countries. That's what Roosevelt's intention was. The reason we went to a Keynesian version of the Bretton Woods rather than Roosevelt's intention was the British Empire. Truman decided the United States was going to be a partner of the British Empire in ruling the world. Roosevelt's intention was the opposite, was to create a cooperation among the nations to eliminate the British Empire, which is the old bitch we want to get rid of. I'm not against the England being a sovereign country. That's very good. It's better for them. Look at the way they're treated today. Look at the way they talk. Maybe if they weren't an empire, they would have an English language again. But the point is the simple thing is so simple. A treaty agreement, on credit, long-term credit, like 30-year, 50-year agreements, on credit, among nations which enter into such treaty agreements with the United States automatically have the constitutional advantage of a global credit system rather than a monetary system. And it becomes essentially a fixed exchange rate system. And that's what we need. So, but these things, these are measures I've indicated, such as the action on the protection of people against foreclosures on mortgages, protection of real banks as opposed to the phony ones, a two-tier credit system, and an international fixed exchange rate system. These are necessary instruments for creating a new world system which can survive the inevitable death and disintegration of the present world monetary system. This is the only rational, feasible option as alternative to pure hell throughout the planet for generations to come. If you care about humanity, you will insist that these measures be taken boldly and now, because we are right now, after 1 year of mass stupidity from the top down, in the US government and other governments. We're now just weeks away from the point at which the whole system goes into disintegration. What we're looking at is not a 1931. We're looking at something comparable to the 14th century European New Dark Age, which came on suddenly and wiped out half the parishes and 1/3 of the population of Europe. And that can happen worldwide if we don't stop it. Now, I'm a little bit old to be president of the United States, but I'm not so old that I can't tell one what to do. And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, you cowardly fools, get up off your butts. Stop this fooling around. Hey, Paulson, get your guts up. I'll show you how to deal with the problem. And there are other people in the banking field and others who will join me in that. They're perfectly good people. They're talented. They don't know as much as they should. They make a lot of mistakes. But look, it's what we got. We got to use what you got. So if these fellows will just have a little bit of my guts and knowledge and act with the intention to do good for this country and for the world at large. And the essential thing is, you're not willing to do good for the world at large, you can't succeed, even in your own country. If you're not willing to enter into an agreement, a long-term agreement on a fixed exchange credit system with Russia, China, India, and with other countries brought into the same group, if you're not willing to do that, sincerely, you're not going to survive. And your descendants, when they come out of the caves 4 or 5 generations from now, will curse your memory unless you do it. This is your opportunity. This is what must be done. Do you have the brains and guts to know you have to do it now? Do you know that Congress must stop what it's doing, because what it's doing is no good, and immediately do this? Do we have to get this idiot in the White House somehow to do that, to go along with it, to give Henry Paulson the guts and the advice to do what he's supposed to do as Secretary of the Treasury, to implement this, to get the bankers inside the Federal Reserve System, who are competent bankers, and other bankers outside it, together on this, and get a unity among people who understand we're at the end. We're at the end of the system. Stop talking about compromises. Stop talking about halfway measures. We must do this now. We must first agree to do it inside the United States. We must have people inside the United States who will say, we're going to do it. And once we say we're going to do it, we have to have a presidential candidate in the United States who will be credible in saying to the countries of China, Russia, India, and so forth, this is what the United States is committed to do as soon as I get to be president. And we can start it right now. That's how you win wars. And that's what we need right now. Those 3 measures. We've got people out there, as foolish as they behaved. I know some of them have brains. Some of them have skills. They lack guts. I have the guts and some of the brains they lack. Let's do it.